still don't know if I like that intro. It's getting there. It's very Saved by the Bell. Don't know if it's good. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Retro Chat podcast. Andy here. Joining me is my guest at this time, making his Retro Chat debut. It's Glenn Redler from GX Accounts. Glenn, how are you doing?
Hey, Andy. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show. I should probably start up with the old chestnut, long time listener, first time caller. But yeah, and I'll just say that's the first time I've seen your intro graphics. Love it, absolutely love it. So you got a fan here.
Oh, perfect. Well, that's what we like. Right, let's everybody know a bit more about Glenn. So, of course, our guest for this today is Glenn Redler from GX Accounts. Check him out on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter by searching for GX Accounts. And what you will get is the best in cloud-based accounting, courtesy of all the guys at GX Accounts. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, I could go on and say all the things I do in my spare time. I'm an ex-hockey player. I'm a wrestling fan, as we're going to find out tonight. But ultimately, in my in my real spare time, I do a bit of accounting work. Basically, I try and have a bit of a laugh with it. Try and keep it fun and friendly. Yeah, that's it really.
Fantastic. Right now, before we crack on with today's little topic, which we'll tell everybody what it's going to be in a moment. If you want to get in contact with us here at the Retro Chat podcast, you can do. All you need to do is go to what's on screen, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitch at Retro Chat Podcast. You can tweet us at Retro Chat Pod, and you can now subscribe on all of the main platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and anywhere else. And did you know, Glenn, that starting with this episode, we're going to be video casting directly to Spotify?
Wow, I did not know that. That's news to me. That's news to me.
Yeah.
I didn't even know Spotify. You could do video stuff on Spotify, if I'm brutally honest. So
it's brand new. It's only a select number of content providers are able to do it at the moment. And yeah, we're going to be doing it. So what will happen is, if you are listening on Spotify, you will have the option to either watch the video or listen to the audio. Your choice what you want to do. Of course, on YouTube, you can watch the videos in their entirety. On Spotify, you'll be able to do the same thing. Any other provider will be audio, but Spotify will give the option to watch the video. So you now get to see us in all of our 720 HD glory right here at the Retro Chat podcast, which is going to be cool, I think. I hope. Now, before we crack on with the topic, I mean, you and I have been talking off air before we went live. There is something that the guys will see in the back of your room that you showed me earlier on, and that's Ecto 1. Tell us about that, because it looked to me like it was just an action figure, like a model, but it's a bit more than that, isn't it?
yeah, so yeah, you can't really tell because it's a little bit far away there. But basically, it's a Lego kit. I don't know whether many of your listeners will be into Lego. I imagine they probably will be. I'll be honest, I haven't done a Lego kit for probably at least 25 years. And earlier this year, I saw that they done a really nice Ecto 1 model, part of their kind of more expensive range, let's say. And yeah, it was a bit of a present after last tax return season was done and dusted. And spent, I suppose it was lockdown really, while we were earlier this year in lockdown. Spending a little bit of time each night putting that together. Nice, relaxing thing to do. But it's nice. It's a nice bit of kit. It's amazing.
It looks fantastic. Yeah, and you said it's got engine noise and it lights up and all that type of thing as well. Doesn't it?
Well, it's got an engine. So you build the engine as part of it. It's got a few little tweaks, like press the button on the side and the door will fly open, and another button, or there'll be a trap that will actually fly out the back of the car. So there's all sorts of those sorts. The more kiddie stuff is there built into it as well. With these sorts of kits as well, you can get you can actually buy the lighting kits for them, usually on online somewhere or other. That they add in about 20-30 quid. Obviously not part of the official model of it, but it does make a nice extra to it. I didn't go down the route on this one. I thought I liked it just as it is.
I tell
The
you,
problem,
I tell you, who would love that would be Lawrence from the Ministry of Slam. He would go nuts for that.
and I have actually done something. I did something a bit weird with it, really, as well. Was every time I built one part of it, I took a picture of it. So on my phone at the moment, I've got 700 pictures of it in various different things that I want to, at some stage when I get a bit of time, actually put into a little slideshow and then have it show it being made and all the different elements to it. So at some point, life as an accountant is a little bit busy at the moment, but at some point I will be putting that together. And sticking it online somewhere or other. So yeah, it's interesting. It's we've all grown up a little bit, but we're still kids at heart. And I think things like Lego and stuff. You think to yourself now. I mean, if you've got children, I imagine you probably be going through the same scenario that my parents used to go, where they walk in to see you and then realize they've stood on a nice 4-bit brick and will scream out in pain. But essentially, it's taken, I think, a little bit of a different form now, and it's more collectibles with the Star Wars range and stuff like that that's out there. I mean, I'm not hugely into Star Wars sort of memorabilia or stuff, but the Millennium Falcon model, which is, I think, sets you back about 500 quid, I think, to get that one. 7,000 pieces. I mean, and the intricate detail in it now is just unbelievable.
It will definitely keep you quiet for a while, wouldn't it?
It would do. I think that was, part of the reason my wife agreed to it. So agreed to be buying that one. So, but anyway, yeah.
Fantastic. Right. Well, that is just amazing. What a cracking thing to do. Have you seen Afterlife yet?
Not yet. It's
No,
on.
me neither.
No, I want to. I'm trying to avoid all the spoilers at the moment. All I can say is I've seen the trailer, the last trailer, and just thought, yeah, I've got to get to see that. And I haven't been to cinema in an awfully long time, so that will be a trip out at some point very soon, hopefully.
Yeah, my wife told me last night that she wants to go see it as well. Now that really did surprise me. So yeah, we're going to be getting a babysitter and going off to the local Cineworld or wherever to watch Ghostbusters Afterlife. I can't believe she wants to see it. I'm
That's a
really
win.
stoked.
That's a
I
win.
know, absolutely. Right, let's do it. Let's talk about what we're here to talk about today, because this month of November, as we all know as wrestling fans, is really known for one thing. That's right, AEW Full Gear. No, sorry, the WWE and of course Survivor Series. And back in 2001, we did, or they did, the Survivor Series pay-per-view, which was the end of the alliance, and it was the winner take all storyline that was culminating with this big dream match, which was the winner takes all team alliance, which is WCW and ECW versus Team World Wrestling Federation, with the winning company remaining and the losing company going out of business. Now, what do you remember about the pay-per-view, first of all? Because the invasion angle was a bit pants, if we're going to put it politely, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I probably. I mean, I know when we spoke about setting this up, and I said this. I probably see this through more rose tinted spectacles than perhaps other people, purely because for me, 2001 was the first full year that I was into wrestling. So it was not. I mean, when I've heard you talk about, back in the early 90s and this happened and that happened, for me, I came into wrestling and found wrestling. I think it was around about March 2000. I finally convinced my parents to get an on-digital, as it was then, box that allowed us to get Sky One for the first time. My parents were so anti-Sky, it was ridiculous. So we got Sky One for the first time, and I think like the very first thing I saw was potentially the final SmackDown before WrestleMania that year. And I kept on watching it. I kept on just watching that. I couldn't see Raw. The internet wasn't really working in our household. My dad used to get really annoyed at the fact that the phone, that he couldn't speak to people on the phone each evening. So it was kind of quite rationed. But yeah, so for me, coming into 2001, I'd finally convinced my parents that we should upgrade on digital, or at least upgrade in the sense of pay for the Sky Sports package, so I could actually watch some of Raw, and I could actually watch SmackDown and see some pay-per-views, other than the ones that were on Channel 4 at the time, because that was another thing. That Channel 4 would show them, and they were edited, and they had adverts in the middle, and all those sorts of things. So for me, this whole invasion angle, the whole 2001. I mean, we're rolling off of WrestleMania X7, which for me is my WrestleMania. That is I could list out those matches one after the other, what happened, what order they were in, and what was going on. And then just before that, we hit this whole WCW's been bought by the WWF at the time, and the whole storyline of actually it wasn't Vince who bought it; it was actually Shane. Shane had beaten Vince to get WCW, and so the whole invasion angle for me was just like, oh my god, what is this? I don't understand. I don't even know who WCW is. I've not, or even ECW. I don't know. But there's all of a sudden all these new people coming on board, and there's all this craziness. Now, I don't know what it was like for you, Andy, at the time. You might look at this as kind of where I would look, possibly somewhere around 2006, 2007, where the storyline started to kind of get a bit run down in the WWE. It was, everything became very methodical almost. I mean, to me, it was just like open season. I didn't know what was going to happen next, and maybe you were the same, but it was, yeah.
I think that's a really intriguing perspective to look at it, because I haven't spoken to someone who really started getting into it around the time of the invasion. So when you're talking to wrestling fans, especially after 15 years of doing wrestling podcasts, it becomes kind of the norm that people have been watching it back in the 80s. I started watching it in 87, 88. First pay-per-view I watched was WrestleMania 3, and then developed it on all the way through. Well, going into the alliance angle, when you thought of the possibility of McMahon owning WCW and the WWF and then ECW at the time, as a wrestling fan, it was, this is the Holy Grail. We're going to see these matches. We're going to see, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Goldberg. We're going to see, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. We're going to see the NWO. We're going to see Sting on World Wrestling Federation programming, and then none of that came. None of that came. And I think we all kind of looked at it and we were going, where are they? The guaranteed contracts came into play. So we knew they were going to sit out until at least the end of November. In some cases, if you look at what happened the following night from this, the Nature Boy Ric Flair debuting back in the WWF. But there was a sense of, we're kind of missing out here. We're missing out on these WCW performers. We're missing out on Sting. We're missing out on Goldberg. We're missing out on Scott Steiner.
Yeah.
Never thought I'd say that. But and instead, what we got was a watered down Diamond Dallas Page, a Chris Kanyon who was never used to the potential that he had, unfortunately, rest in peace. A main event that was Booker T versus Buff Bagwell, where on the first edition of Monday Night Raw, that absolutely stunk. And then it just didn't seem to work. And then what you then had was ECW talent and former WCW talent that had already come to the Federation, that you already knew were WWF through and through, now joining the alliance. And it was, I'm polar opposite to you. Don't get me wrong, WrestleMania X7 will go down as, quite frankly, one of the best WrestleManias of all time. Not just for that match, not just for Rock versus Austin, but it was just unrivaled, I think, at that point. The closest one would be WrestleMania 6 for other reasons. But the Invasion pay-per-view itself that took place in June, and you can listen back to Ministry on Ministry of Slam about that, it didn't hit the mark. And we get to here and we kind of feel like we're limping along a little bit. in terms of the storyline. But don't get me wrong, the Survivor Series itself, if you took that angle away, the matches that we had on the Survivor Series were incredible. And it stands its test of time as being one of the best Survivor Series that they produced, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think it's, you know, that's in hindsight, I can see all that. I can see that now, how much it felt as of, you know, it still does, feels like a wasted opportunity. Things have happened since, you know, but it never was the same. We should have seen all those matchups. You know, we could have seen Sting versus Undertaker at WrestleMania 18, essentially, you know, and it would have been absolutely amazing, off the chart. But I just, you know, as I said, rose tinted spectacles there from my point of view, and leading into this, you know, this Survivor Series, and it was made to feel like, you know, this is everything almost. The final match, the final face off, basically. One side we're going to be continuing, the other side we're all going to get fired, essentially. And all the kind of, as we'll go on to talk about, I'm sure, all the kind of turns and twists in the lead up to that, backstabbing here, left, right, and center, who's the mole, everything. It was a really, really good event from my point of view, and I really did enjoy it.
I couldn't agree more. And let's touch on it now, because this Survivor Series was the 15th annual pay-per-view from the World Wrestling Federation, with 10,142 people in attendance, and it also had 450,000 buys. Took place in North Carolina, in Greensboro, which is synonymous, funnily enough, with the NWA and WCW and the Great American Bash and Starrcade all coming out of North Carolina. So whether or not they meant that to happen or not, a nice little tongue-in-cheek connection there with WCW and the NWA. And I think what we all know about the Survivor Series, and one thing that I think is missing now, is it was known for those elimination matches. It was known for being an entire card of 4-on-4 or 8-on-8 if you're looking at the tag teams. You know, elimination matches of both men and women. In fact, earlier this week, or last week, we released the 1990 Survivor Series, which took place in Hartford, Connecticut, which was all about Survivor Series eliminations. And this one, again, stellar card, absolutely phenomenal, consisted of a number of different matches, and we'll talk about them in just a second. So it had 8 matches on the card, of which one was on the pre-show. And it culminated in the winner takes all match. And what was good about this one was this whole pay-per-view was brand supremacy. It was Alliance versus WWF. It was unification. It was who is going to remain in that winning company, because whoever won the match stayed with the brand. Then mix that in with the commentary team, Glenn, with Jim Ross and the maniacal Paul Heyman, literally playing off each other.
Yeah.
Just you could just close your eyes and imagine this is a legit feud.
Yeah, all night long, basically. Well, for months and months, getting each other. Heyman basically, you know, the Alliance are going to win in the end, you know, and you're all going to be out of jobs. We're not going to keep you. You know, you're all going to be out, and we're going to run wrestling, essentially.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was. It's, you know, when you look back, I used to love Heyman as a commentator. Again, rose tinted spectacles, perhaps, but I used to love him as a commentator. They just brought something very different to the commentary throughout that. But I think it was also him being almost very the obviously with ECW and stuff. You know, the face, the man behind ECW. Having him there, right in your ear constantly, it just gave the whole dynamic of this could actually go either way, I think, and that was important to the event.
Paul Heyman always reminds me as a car salesman. You know, no disrespect to car salesman, but he always reminded me of one of those. And you know, following him again from the late 80s, early 90s, when he was on WCW Saturday Night as part of the Dangerous Alliance, again with Steve Austin and Brian Pillman, and as part of that stable. You know, I grew up with Paul Heyman, and you could see, I think, here in 2001, the early version of the Beast Incarnate's representative, or the head of the tribal chief. You know, you could see it coming, but you can also see that mind, that creative genius, that evil twisted genius that he's got in himself, because the way he used his vocabulary to really kind of sell the story or sell what was happening was an old school heel mixed in with that modern WWF style of storytelling that we know that they like to do. You know, they've got their own way of doing things. And Heyman is that bridge, I think, between the old school days and this new era, this new world of professional wrestling.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay, so let's have a look, because the show kicked off, as we know, with the pre-show, and that was on Sunday Night Heat. That was a six-man match, and it was just incredible. Lance Storm and Raven from the Alliance going over Albert, Scotty 2 Hotty, and Spike Dudley, who had defected from the Alliance back to the WWF. So we'd already had WWF defecting to the Alliance, Alliance defecting back to the WWF. We knew there was going to be some more coming in this one. Not much can really be said about this match. It was on Sunday Night Heat. It was meant to build the anticipation going into the show. But what was interesting was the Alliance got the first win of the night.
Yeah,
You know, so already putting the WWF on the back foot.
yeah, yeah. It's I'm going to be honest. I don't really remember this one at all.
No.
But the point was, just looking down through the card, your Sunday Night Heat was your kind of build up match, and you know, ultimately, you're essentially your buy in now, to the pay per view. To have those characters on there, perfect lineup for them. What I find interesting, and we might talk about this a little bit further on, is when you compare this card to what was the Invasion pay per view, how different it was. You know,
Oh yeah,
they were all solid hands in the ring basically, throughout the evening. But yeah, I mean, it was basically, you know, 6-man match. Who won? Who won, Andy? The Alliance.
the Alliance one, yeah.
Yeah,
So it
yeah,
was Raven, Lance Storm, and Just Incredible. So
yeah,
ECW, if you want to consider
yeah,
it that way, Team ECW against Team WWF. We then moved into the main show, and the opening match on the card was Christian, the former Impact World Champion, current AEW star, wrestling legend, who was defending the WWF European Championship against Al Snow. And this was a real close one, because Snow performed the snowplow on Christian and got a near fall. After which Christian then performed the unprettier on Snow to retain the European Championship. And you know, that's a title that we don't even talk about these days. The World Wrestling Federation European Championship that was launched in 1997 in Berlin, in Germany, with the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith facing off and beating the late great Owen Hart in the main event of a Raw event, a match that you could still put on now on the network and sit there and enjoy, because it's two of the best of all time.
yeah. I mean, the European Championship itself, you know, it's I used to love the matches. I mean, you had the whole different obviously different characters come through with the different titles, and they get elevated using it. Al Snow's sort of run where he was representing a different European country. Do you remember that, Andy?
Yeah.
Amazing stuff, amazing stuff. And then I think it was I want to say William Regal took the title off of him eventually,
Yes. Yeah, he
um,
did.
and had a run with it. And you know, that felt right. It was a shame. It's a shame it's not around. But then again, you know, there's almost too many titles in wrestling these days. And I think, but it was a great elevator, and this was a nice little match really between Christian and Al Snow.
It was, because again, it was the combination of the two eras. You know, you've got Al Snow, who'd been in the WWF for donkey's years, starting off as Leif Cassidy as the New Rockers with Marty Jannetty, right the way through to the Al Snow that we all know and love. And of course, had a run in ECW with Head, which really kind of rejuvenated his career and turned him around, because really great hand, but in the World Wrestling Federation was badly treated and given some
Yeah.
bad characters. Again, it was Paul Heyman who really gave him that run. Christian, I mean, what can you say about Christian that hasn't already been said? You know, the guy is a certifiable Hall of Famer,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
whether or not
Again,
that's WWE or wherever.
wherever I mean, he's he's always. I think with Christian, for me, it's always been, he doesn't have a huge amount of character. He's always been in the shadow of Edge. I think that's like almost been with him throughout his career.
Yeah.
Even now, you're kind of like, Christian in AEW, it's working gradually, but they're kind of pairing him as this sort of the old hand now, aren't they? To some degree with Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus, is that right?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. See, haven't spoken about wrestling in so long. But back here, 2001, this was the sort of Edge and Christian had split at this point in time, and they were both going on their separate paths, and they both sort of intermingle again over the years. It was the right place for him at this time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he lasted too much longer after this, but another 5, maybe 6 years in the WWE before he moved to Impact.
Yeah.
And then obviously came back. And I think the unfortunate thing about Christian, like you said, is he's always in that shadow of somebody else. You know, AEW, he came in, it was his final run. He had a classic match with Kenny Omega on Rampage, absolutely classic match, but then didn't really seem to do anything else after that. And whereas I like this partnering with the Jurassic Express, I'm waiting for that heel turn, because I think Christian just works better as a heel
Yeah.
than he
Yeah.
does as a face. He's got one of those faces that you legitimately want to smack into the middle of next week and see him get his comeuppance. So that needs to happen. But at this point, this was the opera Christian. This was coming out to the opera music with the masks and everything else. This was, I think, where he really got his good run. Next up, we had our very own William Regal facing off against Tajiri. Regal, who is now the Alliance Commissioner, having resigned as the WWF Commissioner. You can't write this. The Alliance Commissioner, who defeated Tajiri with a Regal bomb to win the match. What do you remember of this one, Glenn?
Well, the main thing I remember of this should have been a unification match. At the time, Tajiri was the cruiserweight champion, the WCW cruiserweight champion.
Yes.
And X-Pac was the WWF light heavyweight champion. And the two of them were due. This was supposed to be another unification match, winner takes all. And actually, X-Pac was injured. He suffered an injury in a few weeks beforehand. And that was the sad demise of the light heavyweight championship. It never came back. Instead, the WWE took it on the cruiserweight champion as that sort of belt for going forward. And so back we came, I guess. They went back to plan B with Tajiri and put him in a feud with Commissioner Regal. And of course, Commissioner Regal introduced Tajiri to the WWF at the time, going back as his kind of I don't know what you call it really, his sidekick.
Be very careful how we phrase it.
I am careful. But essentially, this was kind of a little bit of that and yeah, I think the one thing I will say is that it ended up with Regal winning it. And I think now what was that, 3 alliance wins to 0.
Yeah.
But and I don't know how you feel about. I suppose at the time, again, this is probably another discussion for another day. But Regal, Tajiri was partnering with Tori Wilson at the time, I think. And there was after the match, Regal he took out Tajiri again, and then did the same move on Tori Wilson. Now, back then, perhaps we all kind of let it go over our heads. Having a rewatch of it recently, don't know how I sit with how I feel about that these days, and it is like that kind of like, did we really cheer this on in the back in the day? But
There's,
yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of things. I think you can look at the Attitude Era
Mm.
and
Oh
kind of
yeah,
go, there's a lot of things that should never have happened.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm not talking about Kane and Katie Vick, but you know, yeah, there's a lot of things that should never have happened, and I totally agree with you. It's a wonder that the WWF network, or sorry, the WWE network,
yeah.
have actually kept that in
Mm,
the play, because now they're on Peacock in the US. They're censoring a lot of stuff. So I would have expected that to have been censored quite
yeah.
heavily, but
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, you look at it again, look at the time, and it was just like, oh, this is Regal being full bad guy here, and we want to boo the alliance even more. This is what's
mm.
really happening. But yeah, Regal was obviously commissioner. Who was commissioner of the WWF at the time? Then,
Mick Foley.
hey, correct.
Da-da-da, da-da, da-da. Sorry.
I was just gonna call you King of Wrestling Trivia again there. I know you perhaps got a little bit usurped the other week, but but
Thanks.
yeah,
Thanks, Glenn.
and yeah, I mean, probably jumping ahead a little bit. Where they later on, this is part of that era. They went and cut away to WWF New York. WWF New York was such a big thing. Like every pay per view, they
Yeah,
chucked someone there, hadn't they?
yeah.
Weirdly, it was Mick Foley, and weirdly, it was the commissioner. Maybe because he probably lived closer enough, or something like that. But yeah, that started some of the animosity and the change leading after this pay per view, where Foley was replaced. I think not long afterwards. But
We'll,
yeah,
we'll, we'll,
we'll
we'll
cover
touch
that.
on that shortly after, but short in a moment. But they actually made a comment about, why are you at WWF New York and not here in Survivor Series? And it was, yeah, it did kind of set the scene for
Yeah.
something that was coming on. But Mick Foley, I mean, who was your favorite commissioner, Regal or Foley?
Ooh, you see, I'd probably say Foley. I think I'd have to say Foley. He's the fun guy, basically. Whereas Regal was more, despite him being English and we all want to cheer the English guy, he was still like just, um, missed a play by the rules, I think, and it just from a storyline perspective, you just wanted Foley to be that guy, and it was always just so much more going on. The dynamic of the events changed because of it.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. But I think with Regal, there was this old school heel mentality, but he was so good at being rubber faced.
Oh yeah,
If you think about the facial expressions. So remember that time, I think it was Tajiri had peed into
Jericho,
the
Jericho it was.
Jericho peed into the
Yeah,
tea.
yeah,
Yeah, and he drunk it.
yeah.
And the facial reaction there, I mean, that's a moment you don't forget.
No, I know.
He sold it so well.
Yeah,
He was, I think, Regal had a bit of a weird career. Steven Regal in WCW, Lord Steven Regal came in as the real man's man in the World Wrestling Federation, which was a terrible gimmick to be given. Had his demons, dealt with the demons, and I don't think he ever really then got the run that he should have had, because I think that there's definitely a case where he could have had the trigger pulled on him and been the champion of the WWF. I
yeah,
really think that, because I think he was so technically gifted that you could have put him in the ring with the likes of Benoit. I know we're not meant to say it, but Benoit or Angle or Austin or Rock or whatever, Jericho, and he could have got a good match out of anybody. And we saw that over the year.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You look back now and you think, oh, it was such a wasted opportunity there. But there were too many other names around, I think, at the time,
Yeah,
and probably never ever going to happen. I'd love to have seen a. I mean, we might see it, I guess, because am I right in saying the son of Mr. Regal is now venturing into the world of professional wrestling?
he's in NXT UK. Yeah,
Yeah,
already. I mean, I haven't seen him work yet. I don't know what his work rate is like, but what I have heard on the net is the fact that he is phenomenal. So he will get a call up to NXT 2.0 on pretty
Yeah,
quick, I would imagine.
yeah, yeah.
That will be interesting then to see that father-son relationship span out on NXT. I must
Yeah,
admit, that would be. I could see a manager role coming for Regal there. Ooh,
I think that would work as well. I would love to
yeah,
see that. I would love to see that.
as full-blown heels. Oh, yeah, okay. Glad and I
Yeah,
have booked it. Listen
there
to
we
it,
go.
Vince. There we go.
Done.
Next up was the first of the was the second, the first, sorry, of the unification matches. It was the WCW US Championship and the World Wrestling Federation Intercontinental Championship as Edge defended the US title against Test and the IC title. Basically the finish for this one was Test performed a pump handle slam on Edge for the near fall. Edge then came back with a spear on Test, who attempted a full Nelson slam, but Edge countered that into a roll up to win. And finally, we had one on the score sheet for the World Wrestling Federation and the first of those unified titles with the Intercontinental Championship remaining active. And the end, at that point, of the WCW United States Championship.
Yeah, or would it be for
Wow.
if the final match went the other way? I guess it would have been carrying on as the US Championship. But yes, it was a good match. This was probably well, you know, Edge was coming up now at this stage. You know, solid hand in singles matches. Test was golden boy, wasn't he? He was almost like the golden boy, and just like they wanted to do stuff with him, but it just never clicked. And I think as we'll move on to, you know, that he reappeared a little bit later. But yeah, solid match really. And it was good to see Edge win that one, and it was good to see. It was good to have the whole, you know, all right, we're at 3-1 now. How is this gonna pan out? But at least Edge is still going to be around. So yeah,
which is always a good thing. I mean, the thing about Test was Andrew Martin was a big guy. He was everything that Vince liked. You know, big, tall, big power moves. But like you said, he never really clicked with the audience. And whether or not that was his ability or his personality, I don't know. But one of the things that I felt with Test was the minute they paired him up with Stacy Keibler and she started being his marketing manager or marketing expert, and the release of the testicles and all that type of thing, you suddenly saw this different side of Test coming out. And it became he became a bit more fun. He became a little bit more aggressive, but a bit more fun. And like you said, we're going to see that momentarily in the card itself. But he was beginning to understand how to put a solid match on. You then get someone from like Edge, who even at this early stage of his career was a future Hall of Famer and could really get a decent match out of anyone. You knew you were in good hands. Edge at this point, I think, reminds me of a Seth Rollins. You know,
yeah.
he's the hand. He's the one who's able to go out there, and it doesn't matter who you put him against. He will give you a 5-star match.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And when you know when we think of sort of, you know, Edge at that time, you know, this was pre-injuries and things like that. He could go, you know, and they've been put in these, you know, when it was Edge and Christian, obviously the tag team matches coming up, but you know, I think from my eyes at that point in time, looking into this, you know, it was I think it was probably for me like the first time a tag team had properly split. For me, it was like, oh, Edge and Christian, they're brothers, as they were. They were sold as brothers, never looked alike, but they were sold as brothers, you know. And yeah, to see both of them doing well separately, you know, just cemented this kind of like they're great at what they do. And there's going to be this point at some point in the future whereby they're going to come face to face again at some point, whether that's in partnership or against each other. And maybe even, I mean, I think my sort of 17, 18-year-old mind at that stage was probably coming up with dream scenarios whereby we would have had Edge and Christian to unify the Intercontinental and the European Championship, something along those lines at WrestleMania. But that didn't quite happen like that. And probably good job it didn't.
No, because I don't think it would have lived up to expectations. I think we had it on such a high pedestal about what we wanted, but What was great, I think, was to see the last run that Christian had in the WWE was to come out in the Royal Rumble and be in the ring with Edge. You know,
Yeah,
that returning Edge and everything else. I think that was very important to see as like the closing bookmark of their two runs in WWE. Because I think it's very fair to say that Christian won't be back in the WWE now as an active performer, and I think it's fair to say Edge won't leave the WWE and go anywhere else. As much as we might like him to go to AEW and face off against Omega and Punk and all that type of thing, it's not going to happen. So we've had that, but it was
mm,
still a great moment
yeah,
to see. Next up was the Tag Team Championship unification, and this one was going to be a cracker. It was the WCW Tag Team Champions, the Dudleys, Bubba Ray and Devon, facing off against the WWF Tag Champs, the Hardy Boys, Matt and Jeff, inside the 15-foot high steel cage to unify the belts. Now, Stacy Keibler got involved in this one. She stole the cage door key off the referee and passed Bubba and Devon a table. Matt then prevented a 3D and escaped the cage. Jeff attempted a swanton off the top of the cage through the table, but Devon avoided, causing Jeff to fall through the table. Bubba then pinned Jeff to win the match and unify the tag team championships. And we are back to the Alliance 4, WWF 1. Put these two teams into a match with tables and with a steel chair, steel cage. What are you going to get out of it? This is always going to be a cracker.
yeah. Carnage. Usually carnage when the two teams are going against each other. This was, I think, the very first. I want to say the very first steel cage match, at least televised, between the two teams.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So this, I mean, so it was everything on the line again. What I think I found interesting in sort of rewatching this back, and I guess it was starting to hint towards Matt and Jeff going their separate ways, was Matt kind of escaped the cage, left Jeff to do his own thing against both Dudleys, and then went and lost.
Yeah.
Essentially. And it was just like, what are you doing? What are you doing? But it was as usual with these two teams. You get what you pay for. There was never a dull moment with the Hardys and the Dudleys, was there? It was always something going on, and yeah.
Do you think it was one match too many for that team? Because, bear in mind, they've done TLC, they've done tables matches, ladder matches, they've done the TLC match at WrestleMania 17, which is, as we said, one of the best matches of all time, still up there. And now they're in another gimmick match on a pay-per-view. Was it one too many? Would you have preferred to have seen somebody else maybe in that run?
Possibly, but then I think, when you look at it, you had to have two pretty established teams, and there were no other two teams as well established as the Dudleys and the Hardys at this time. Anybody else? I mean, I think we did have in the whole invasion angle, we had Undertaker and Kane win the WCW titles at one point.
We did, yeah.
And things like that, but obviously they were being used elsewhere. I think this was right. In my mind, it was right. And it's crazy to think that, before, probably in 6 months from this, the Hardys have gone their separate way, I think, and the Dudleys have gone their separate way, thanks to what happens afterwards. But it was very much, did the right team win? I don't think it really mattered, if I'm honest, other than to sort of cement that, the Alliance are doing better and make you fearful. But ultimately, it did everything you expected, I think.
I think with this one, it didn't matter if you were rooting for the Alliance or for the WWF. You went home happy, didn't you?
Yeah,
It was just, and even to this day, Jeff is now coming out to No More Words, the old theme tune he had in his solo run. Bully Ray is obviously no longer active. Devon's a producer. Matt's doing Big Time Matt in AEW. They're still involved, and they still talk about this match in TLC as being one of the standouts in their career. And, when you think about the match is 20 years old, and we still talk about it and still look at it with this pedestal and how high it is, that's a testament to those four. It really is. Next up was the Immunity Battle Royal, and this was featuring members from both the Alliance and the WWF. The winner of the match would be protected from being fired for 1 year, regardless of which company won in the main event. I'll go through the competitors in this one now. So in the no, we won't. Yes, we will. The Battle Royal. We had Bradshaw, Farouk, Lance Storm, Billy Kidman, DDP, Albert, Taz, Perry Saturn, Raven, Chuck Palumbo, Crash Holly, Just Incredible, Sean Stasiak, Stevie Richards, Tommy Dreamer, The Hurricane, Spike Dudley, Hugh Morris, Chavo Guerrero, Funaki, Billy Gunn, and who else?
I believe Scotty Too Hotty, but then he got decked backstage by Test, and Test ran on. I came in behind everyone, basically entered the battle royal, and won it.
Exactly, by eliminating the one Billy Gunn and kicking him out of the ring, which means that Test was guaranteed to stay in either company for the next 12 months. And this, I think, is when Test really just went, boom,
Yeah,
I've arrived. Because you knew at this point they were going to put some sort of a rocket ship behind Test. It didn't materialize quite the way I think he expected it, but he was definitely in their plans
yeah.
going forward in 2002, and you could still see that. Next up, then, was the Women's Championship. It was a 6-pack challenge, not to unify, but just for the vacant WWF Women's Championship. And it was Trish Stratus, Lita, Jacqueline, Mighty Molly, Jazz, and Ivory. Trish Stratus performed the Stratus faction on Ivory to win the title. And this one, I think, women's wrestling at the time didn't really get the respect that they deserved. But when you're in a match with Trish, with Lita, with Molly, and with Ivory to a degree, and definitely with Jazz, you were guaranteed that they were going to come out and pull out all punches, and that they did.
Yeah, yeah. And this was of course this was Jazz's debut,
Yeah.
wasn't it? It was she hadn't been seen previously. You know, the women's championship at that time had taken basically a sabbatical during the year. China had actually won it at WrestleMania X7. I think defended it once, maybe.
Yes, and then she was in.
Yeah, and then injured, and that was the end. The belt just disappeared. So I think looking back at this was really important for the women's championship to get back on the card. And I think it was really important for it to go to someone fresh and new. Trish had played the valet, the manager role for quite some time at that point in time, and it was someone brand new to win, to capture the belt. You could have argued it could have gone to an old hand like Ivory, or you know, or even Lita, but I think Trish winning it just built then the you know, the ongoing Trish Lita feud further and further, and that storyline continued on for years.
It did. And then what we got was one of the greatest women's competitors in history. To
Yeah,
this day, people still talk about Trish being where she was and being one of the greatest Hall of Famer, just like Amy Dumas. And, you know, I saw Amy Dumas at LFCC a few years ago, the London Film Comic Con, and she did a panel. And one of the questions was, who was one of your greatest opponents? And she came out and said, Trish. Not just because they're best friends now, obviously, but because of the fact that she was so quick to pick up what they wanted her to do. And she was athletic, and she came in. She wasn't the model that they normally hired. She had an affinity for it, and she worked hard. She put the effort in. She learned the business from being the valet that you mentioned with TNA, Test and Albert. This is really all about Test tonight, this show. To being the greatest female champion, second only to Moolah.
yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but what I would love to have seen here is the WCW Women's Championship. I said I would have loved to have seen a unification match, and then the winner taking that WCW strap and throwing it in the bin on the announce table, recreating that Alundra Blaze Medusa segment from Nitro that we hear about today, because that just would have been the ultimate, you know, the ultimate moment to have seen that happen.
the complete reversal and the sort of the payoff
Yeah,
at that moment when I mean, I don't even know, Andy, I don't even know who the WCW Women's Champion was at the time.
they didn't have one.
Did they not? Not at that time.
No,
That
no,
was
it's the one strap that they never actively put in, which I think again kind of symbolizes what they thought of the women's division at that point. Because why wouldn't you bring it over?
yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
they were very much about bringing the men's titles over, but why wouldn't you bring the women's belt? If it happened now, you know, let's say it was Impact versus WWE or AEW versus WWE, you could pretty much guarantee it would be Britt Baker versus Becky Lynch or
Hmm.
Britt Baker versus Charlotte Flair, because it would be, or even a triple threat between the three of them, because it would be that big a draw to have the women on the card to unify it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was, I guess, again, another sign of the times, wasn't it? You know,
Yeah,
it just wasn't the ladies were used for their sex appeal pretty much more than their in-ring abilities. And yeah, if you look at who came in through the alliance angle, Stacy Keibler and Tori
Tori
Wilson, and
Wilson.
no one else.
No,
And that was it, wasn't it?
it was, and it took us a few years. But bear in mind, we got Evolution, we got that women's revolution, we got the likes of Sasha Banks, we got Natty Neidhart, we got, you know, the Bellas to a degree. We got the women that we needed, and
Yeah,
I think I might do a retro on women's wrestling. I think that might be,
yeah, you should. You
I think that
should.
might be an intriguing one to do. Now that then brought us to the main event. And this one lasted 45 minutes. It was the longest match on the card. And it was Team WWF, The Rock, Chris Jericho, The Undertaker Kane, and The Big Show facing off against the Alliance. Steve Austin, Rob Van Dam, Kurt Angle, Booker T, and Shane McMahon in a 5-on-5 traditional Survivor Series elimination match. And we'll go through the order of eliminations in this one. So, first off was the Big Show, who was eliminated by Shane McMahon. Shane was then eliminated by Chris Jericho. Kane was the third to be eliminated by Rob Van Dam. The Undertaker closely followed by Kurt Angle. Booker T from the Alliance was eliminated by The Rock. RVD was eliminated by Jericho. Angle was eliminated by The Rock. And Jericho was eliminated by Steve Austin. And Steve Austin was eliminated by The Rock, thanks to the turn, the switch, the reveal of the mole, the Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle. What did you think of this one?
Yeah, who was the mole? I just for weeks leading up to it, it was there was so much going on, and by this stage in the invasion angle, we had our faces and our heels on both sides of the card. So we had our, you know, you had your Rock in the WWF team. On the other hand, you had Chris Jericho, and they'd been feuding over titles and who was the best, you know, wrestler in the WWF side of things. In the Alliance, Stone Cold Steve Austin, with his somewhat failed heel turn, sort of throughout 2001, had started getting more and more cheers again. You had Kurt Angle, who had jumped ship at the last minute, and was basically the, you know, the bad guy. But and it came down to those four, right? You know, those were the last four. We had to have our iconic Survivor Series moment. The Rock actually tapping out Kurt Angle to the sharpshooter. So just to throw that in there. But yeah, it was about who was going to do the dirty on who, and how was this all going to play out. And the tease throughout was that it was Austin who had secretly joined back with the WWF. But ultimately, it wasn't, and it was actually Angle, and Angle basically clouting Austin with a belt, I think,
Yep.
yeah, just that moment where again it came down to the last two, you know, the big two, Austin and Rock, one more time, and a final rock bottom from the Rock, and they just it had I think this match had everything in terms of, you know, you had your Shane McMahon stunt moment, doing the old. It what's the one where he goes from coast to coast,
Coast
isn't
to
it?
coast.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, Vince should have been in this match. Was originally scheduled to be in this match, but he was injured as well, replaced by the Big Show.
Mm.
So probably it would have been Shane eliminating Vince, I think. But yeah, the momentum built out throughout those 45 minutes. Rob Van Dam at the time, the hardcore champion, and really, I think the big sort of mover, the most popular guy to come in through the alliance angle by far. Everybody got behind RVD from day one. Very much feels like the whole what's the chap in? I've forgotten his name now. Adam Cole. Right now, Adam Cole turned up in All Elite straight off with the whole Adam Cole baby thing. RVD walked in 20 years earlier to the WWF, and everybody knew him as RVD, and it just went from there. I didn't know him as RVD, mind you, but that's that's my story. But yeah, all the way through this match, it was just like, who is going to win? And it did flip flop. It really did. You just didn't know. And then Jericho turned on The Rock at one point in time after being eliminated. Angle came in eventually and took out Austin. There was even a bit for the referees. Earl Hebner, who was a referee in this one, got knocked out of the ring at one point in time. In came
Nick Patrick,
who then got decked by Austin. Who was technically Austin, Nick Patrick was the alliance referee. And yeah, no, it came down to it. And then cue the celebrations of Vince McMahon coming out and standing on the stage at the top with his arms aloft. And the world was never the same again. Of course, we also had, we had the glorious moment of Heyman taking off his headphones really, really slowly, and JR just laying into him going, "You're gone. You're absolutely gone." And yeah, it was beautiful. Beautiful moment.
Which really did set the scene for the next night. But just one thing, just kind of mention about this match. What was interesting was we went full circle. So the following month at Vengeance, it was the winner takes all, the undisputed champion, the unified undisputed champion, which was Jericho, Rock, Austin, and Angle. So it was the final four for that winner takes all match. And also consider the last two men in the ring, Steve Austin and The Rock, a rematch from WrestleMania 17, where when McMahon aligned himself with Vince, you could see where they were playing with that. I don't think anybody expected Angle. I think maybe you could see it. You could see it coming, but it was the following night on Monday Night Raw, which, if you're talking about Survivor Series, you have to talk about these three iconic moments. The first of them being the debut of one of the most infamous segments in Raw history, the Vince McMahon Kiss My Ass Club, with William Regal puckering up and becoming the first member of that. We talked about earlier on Regal being rubber face. We talk about Regal being able to sell everything. I genuinely don't think they could have picked a better person to go out there and do that angle with Vince.
No, it was amazing, wasn't it? I mean, and then the run that had afterwards of the whole, it must have gone on for years, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
He was next in that. I mean, obviously, the momentum behind it, or the idea behind it, was obviously Regal, to get his job back, had to do this on national TV,
Yeah.
And he did, and he went through with it, and then it became a thing, but yeah, just a one at the time probably cringeworthy, but a wonderful moment looking back at it a little bit.
The second of those big three moments actually came at the beginning of the show, before the Kiss My Ass Club, because Vince McMahon came out and fired the Alliance commentator Paul Heyman, who took a lunge at Jim Ross, and they had a bit of a beat down at commentary, who was replaced by Jerry the King Lawler to reestablish the Ross Lawler relationship, because it had been Lawler who left the WWF over the way his partner at the time, Stacey Carter, Kat, was being treated or being handled by the WWE. He went to the XWF, which was run by Jimmy Hart and Brian Knobbs, and then he returned. And this was a great moment to see the crowd just popped massively when Jerry walked through the crowd and when Ross and Heyman went toe for toe at the announce booth.
Yeah, just another wonderful moment that came out of this. And I know we talked about Heyman being the commentator throughout the invasion angle. Lawler, I don't think he was missed. I don't think he was really. I think Heyman, the whole Heyman JR, that again, it just worked. And I don't know how King would have fitted into it, to be honest.
I think they would have had to have taken one of them off the position. Because Lawler's relationship with ECW was never positive. He went in there in '97 as the big WWF heel to kind of take him over. He had no relationship with WCW. So how you would play that as part of the alliance angle, I don't know. Jim Ross technically could have played the heel part of that because of the relationship with WCW back in the day. But then he'd been released, unceremoniously by Eric Bischoff. So that wasn't there. So yeah, it was very, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that until you said it. But no, I don't think Lawler would have made it half as good as what it was.
So it was right, that everything lined up and he came back at that point in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the one person who was running around Monday Night Raw proclaiming himself the savior of the WWF was, of course, Kurt Angle, who we talked about momentarily. And he was going to be rewarded by Vince by being handed the championship. They were going to strip Stone Cold of the WWF title and award that to the Olympic gold medalist until the music hit. And in Charlotte, North Carolina, out walks the Nature Boy, Ric Flair, the 16-time, or if you listen to his podcast, Ric Flair Uncensored, the 21-time World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy, Ric Flair, came out and said that he was the one who bought the stock from Shane and Stephanie. He was the one who had the majority ownership. And now they were partners. Him and Vince McMahon were partners, co-owners of the WWF. We had that great Vince McMahon pulling the ear facial reaction that took Raw off the air. What did you make of the Nature Boy arriving at the WWE?
But this was again, I get from my eyes at the time, I'm wondering who the heck this guy is. But in hindsight, this was just this sort of, I think this was the thing, that when the invasion ended, it was like, right, we've got to try and put things right. And I think part of that's bringing Lawler back in. Part of it's getting the championships back in order, particularly the WWF Championship, the World Championship, as it was then known, instead of the WCW Championship.
Yeah.
And I think bringing Flair in at this moment just cemented that like there was a danger of this being WWF running away with things, and it kind of trying to fight. I don't know which way they would have gone. It had to have someone to go against Vince. Bringing Flair in North Carolina, genius.
Yeah,
no better way to introduce him. So, and then, like you said, it set up the whole angle of unifying the championships at Vengeance, and then Chris Jericho never shut up about it, did he? Really, after that, but
still goes on about it now. Goes on about it now, 20 years later. But it also set up more than that. It set up No Way Out of 2002 with the arrival of a lethal dose of poison, which was the NWO, and that infamous turning of the chair where Vince McMahon's cutting the promo, and you can see the back of the chair in the mirror. It says NWO. Hogan, Hall, and Nash coming into the company. Critics will say it's because their guaranteed contract had come to an end, so they needed a payday. Whatever, we got the NWO in the WWF, which then led us to WrestleMania 18, which was, of course, Hogan versus Rock. That famous match which is still talked about. And next year we will be covering WrestleMania 18 because I can't wait to talk about that one. So whereas we didn't think we had the stars during the invasion angle, they all of a sudden started appearing post Survivor Series, post invasion. And of course, bear in mind, it was only 12 months after that, I think, where Eric Bischoff arrived as the general manager of Monday Night Raw.
That's it. That's it. That's the other thing that came out of this, the first original brand split.
Yeah.
You know, it did. It came. So we headed out of Survivor Series, like I said, through Vengeance, straight. You know, bringing in the NWO at No Way Out, and then pretty much 2 or 3 weeks after WrestleMania, we had this kind of like the first ever draft, and it was like, what the heck's going on? But they had to do it in some ways. You know, it had to distinguish things. I think I really loved this, and I still to this day wish the WWE would get behind this whole one champion across both shows. I know why. It needs to be bigger. It makes each show bigger and doesn't sort of distinguish. But there was still something about having a belt that went a championship that was the top championship between both shows overall. But you know, the other thing, special mention on this, we led out of Survivor Series, I said, to Vengeance. We all know what happened there, but Booker T screws Steve Austin out of the championship was one of the points. And then we had that brilliant supermarket brawl that just, for me, that's just like one of the iconic moments. I just love that, you know, Austin and throwing bags of flour and all sorts at Booker T in the supermarket. And I could watch that for days and days on end, I think, on repeat. But yeah, no, it was the changing face. And in actual fact, the following year, that was when the WWF became the WWE. You know,
it was
a complete change, brand split, and the rest is history, I guess you'd say.
It is, because it's also interesting to think about the year, how different the landscape of the WWE was just 1 year later, because it was at Survivor Series 02 where the Elimination Chamber was unveiled. You know, where you had Michaels returning to the WWE as an active in-ring performer following the SummerSlam 02 match with Triple H, the unsanctioned match, to where we went after that ride that we went on was when I actually really think that this point was the heyday of professional wrestling, the 01, 02, 03 mark. They really were riding that wave and then started to come down. We had some great performers, some great matches, a new generation being formed. You know, you think about Austin wasn't around much, The Rock wasn't around much, Goldberg came in for a cup of coffee, Steiner came in. We saw different talents that we weren't used to seeing on WWE. But what I also think was not having that competition in WCW, longevity-wise, hurt the company going forward. That's a talk for another day. And Impact / TNA, as much as we wanted them to succeed, they were never going to have the budget. Now what we're seeing is what we've wanted for a long time, a true rival to the WWE, which is All Elite, and what they're doing and how they're going out there and really kind of showcasing the WWE's weaknesses. But that's not what we're about. This is about the old school. This is about looking back on the past. If you rated this pay-per-view, Glenn, out of 10, what would you give it?
You got to use the sort of, you know, scale. The best WrestleMania has got to be a 10, hasn't it? So, I mean, I'd put this at about an 8 for me. I think a solid 8. It built up to such a crescendo over what was going on. And then, as I said, the historical elements of what then happened and transpired the following night on Monday Night Raw. Yeah, solid 8.
It was the rebirth, wasn't it, of the WWE, I think, at that point. Couldn't agree with you more. I think 8 is just right. Well, that's it. That's the Survivor Series of 2001. How have you enjoyed your debut on Retro Chat? And
I will say thank you very much for having me. You know, it's taken me back. I feel like a child again. I feel like that. Well, I say child. I wasn't a child. I feel like I was back in sixth form, and you know, do you want to hear a little story, Andy? I was thinking about this earlier. So, you know, back in the day, I was a little bit of a practical joker. Me and my mates were a little bit of a practical joker, and we at this time because we were all into wrestling to some degree, and I used to hear the news of like Monday Night Raw from my mates on a Tuesday morning. Like, did you see the alliance? There's now this alliance thing. But we used to have these clocking in and out cards in sixth form. Yeah, this is very old school. But you know, when you turned up for your class, you turned it over, say you were in. There was a load of spare ones, and you know, this was, you know, early 2000s. So Mr. Craig David was a big thing at the time. We actually wrote one out for Craig David, and then throughout each day we would you know, clock it in or clock it out. First one in, we'd clock him in. Last one out, we'd clock him out. It's fine. You know, it was all a bit of a fun. Other people like saw, oh, Craig David, you know, who can be possibly called the same name as the pop star guy. All good until the fire alarm went off once, and we're all queued up outside. And I still, you know, this is why I tell the story. I still get that little kick out of it. But the maths teacher running up and down shouting, Craig David, Craig David. Has anybody seen or heard from Craig David? And just like kind of like silence and stuff. But I suppose this is an admittance of guilt, and whether the maths teacher watches this or not, I think probably fairly unlikely. But it was just a bit of fun, and that was what wrestling was about at the time. You know, it was fun for me. It was you know, it was interesting. It was I didn't have the internet. It was just me and my mates knowing, you know, watching it and enjoying it, and not knowing what the news was. Who were these guys? And so that's why for me this was just a wonderful way for me to sort of reminisce with you today, Andy, and yeah, really enjoyed myself. So thank you very much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'd love to have you back on. If you want to come back on again, do another one, then let's do it. We got a lot more wrestling content to cover. So of course we're heading into Royal Rumble season. So I think a Royal Rumble should be next.
Yeah.
Be next on the agenda.
I
Glenn,
agree.
it has been an absolute pleasure having you on. A long-time listener, as you said earlier on, of the shows that Lee and I used to do back in the day at the Squared Circle and the Ministry of Slam. And it means a lot, I know, to Lee and to myself that you've kept listening to us over the years. So thank you so much for coming back on. And all the best. Now, if you would like to get in contact with Glenn, you can do. All you need to do is head over to social media and search for GX Accounts, or visit gxaccounts.com if you are looking for accountancy service extraordinaire. You're going to get it from Glenn. Before we wrap up, though, if you want to get in contact with me, you can do. All of the subscription details are on screen: Facebook, Instagram, and Twitch, Retro Chat Podcast, or you can tweet me at Retro Chat Pod. And don't forget, all of the audio feeds are on all of the main podcast platforms. And all that's left for me to say is that's it for this week. Next time you see us or hear us, we will be discussing all things Back to the Future. We're going to go back to 1985, Hill Valley, Marty McFly, Doc Brown, Lee Tyers, and myself. So it's going to be an interesting one. But until then, Glenn, thank you so much. To everybody listening or watching, we will see you at the matches. Until then, take care.